Hello, everyone. Welcome back to The Long View. I'm Julian Zelizer, and I am here with Charlie Sykes, the author of To the Contrary and podcaster of To the Contrary. Charlie, welcome back.
It's good to talk with you again. Second time this week.
So we spoke on your podcast a few days ago, and when it ended, we didn't know kind of what would happen, assuming something would happen. But I don't know. I assume you feel the same way, but the Comey indictment and the context surrounding it seems quite significant in terms of where we are and where the Department of Justice is. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, no, it's hard to overstate how significant it is. And as I wrote in my newsletter, part of me feels like, okay, we've been here before, we've seen this, we've seen this time and time again as he's broken through all the norms. He's been threatening to go after his opponents for years now, and yet this feels like we've entered new territory because it is. And I think it's just you just go through the series of events. You have the investigation into Comey. The U.S. attorney and the career staff say there's not sufficient evidence to charge him. They come up with a detailed memo explaining why there is not evidence to charge or get a conviction at trial. The U.S. attorney says, "I'm not going to do it." Trump fires him. Then publicly, in a social media post, orders the attorney general to go after his political enemies. And within days, his hand-picked mediocrity, who's put in as U.S. attorney, gets the indictment. There's nothing subtle about it. There's nothing mysterious about it. You had the threat. Donald Trump wants everyone to know that this is him, that he did it, that he put the hit on James Comey. And so there's no pretense. There's no hidden Watergate tapes. As you said the other day on my podcast, it's the in broad daylight strategy of this administration.
Yeah, and it seems it serves. I mean, so we're talking about a structure, norm, set of guidelines that DOJ has followed since Watergate, response to the Nixon presidency, and hasn't been perfect, but generally I think it's held, and I think both sides have done a decent job. Again, not perfect, but this is a total breakdown. And I
Total.
think that I'm just curious. I mean, the public accounting of this is both a threat, it's an intimidation tactic, but it also then just makes it a norm because he's not doing this in secret. This is kind of a Nixonian moment. If I do it, it's okay.
Well, I can certainly imagine. I mean, look, we've seen this pattern before. I bet you we've seen several patterns. If you would have said that he was going to do some of these things, we would have been accused of Trump derangement syndrome. And then he does them, and you see the MAGA folks defend this and rationalize this. I suppose there are some who will say, no, this is not Trump. This is actually the Department of Justice finding the evidence and going through the grand jury. But what's fascinating is watching how Trump will always jump in and say, no, 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 I did it. The tweets that he put out, or the bleats that he put out, where he talks about how, you know, uh, Comey is a dirty cop. He needs to pay a big price for all this. He's basically demanding a conviction. So he's judge, jury, execution of all of that. And again, the fact that there is no pretense. Now, there was once a time, as you and I remember, when there would have been grown-ups, principal people in the room at the White House or the Department of Justice who would have said, "No, Mr. President, you can't do this. Or if you do this, I'm going to resign." There would be mass protests, statements of principle. But I don't know about you, but those voices are either silent or have been disappeared. So much for all of those norms. And to your point, is this now going to become the new normal that the President of the United States decides who he doesn't like, who he wants to hurt because they hurt him, and sticks the Department of Justice on it? And the Department of Justice says, yes, sir.
And it's already, I mean, he's already I don't know if it was the last few hours or yesterday, said there's going to be more people he's going after. So if someone thinks Comey is the only target, um, they're mistaken. And again, the president's making that clear. What does this do if we have a president? We already have talked often about growing presidential power, but if you have a president, just in terms of stepping back, who essentially controls DOJ to do whatever they want, not simply in terms of policy, but in terms of prosecution, which is a whole different ball game. What does that do to the balance of power, to the constitutional system?
It feels like he's taking a wrecking ball to it. I was at a forum a couple of months ago, weeks ago, where a former very high-ranking official in the Justice Department, Jack Smith, I think it was Jack Goldsmith, I'm sorry,
Uh-huh.
um, said something along the lines of, he's dropped a nuclear bomb on the Department of Justice. But this is not just institutional capture, institutional failure. I mean, it does break down the separation of powers, but also we talk about the erosion of the rule of law. I mean, the whole point of the rule of law is that we are governed by laws, not by men. And Donald Trump is saying, no, not on my watch. If you have embarrassed me or hurt me or come after me, I am coming after you as revenge, as retaliation. And it doesn't matter what the facts are or what the law is, because the attorneys in the Department of Justice went through this and said the law and the facts do not support these charges, either for James Comey or for Letitia James. And both Trump and his attorney general are saying the law be damned. We don't care. So we are I think we're in a position more dangerous even than some of us alarmists
Mm.
warned we would be in.
And
Because it's not erosion, it's collapse.
And what's happened, I mean, in years past, there was a sort of mutual assured destruction mentality that there were certain things you didn't wanna do because once you do them, they can be done to you. Why don't Republicans um, some Republicans at least think that through, that opening this door might easily turn against them. What's the thinking? What's the strategy? What's the outlook of the Republicans on the Hill who, again, have the power to actually do something about this?
Well, Julian, I think this is the most interesting question of the week. And there's so many things that are going on here, but it is this failure of imagination. And as you point out, one of the reasons why we have restraint in a liberal democratic system is because you know that the other person, is likely to have those same powers. If you abuse your power, that you might be on the receiving end after the next election. So I don't know why. I think they ought to be very focused on. Can you, while you're applauding what Donald Trump is doing and his expansion of his powers, how will you feel if President AOC is doing the same thing, or Gavin Newsom is doing the same thing, or JB Pritzker? Can you imagine what that would be like? And I'm sorry that it raises the question, and I have been very reluctant to go here, but they're certainly acting like a group that does not expect that there's going to be a turnover of power, right? They are engaging, whether you're talking about their corruption, whether you're talking about the abuse of power, they're acting as if there will never come a reckoning, there will never be accountability, that there will never be a peaceful transfer of power that would turn these powers over to the other side. And I think that's something that, as we begin to try to get our heads around this new world we're in, I think we need to take that seriously now.
And it becomes self-fulfilling because if you do these things, you can't give power back.
You can't.
I
You
mean,
can't.
the kind of desperation only becomes greater to do whatever possible not to let the other person seize those tools and use them against you, right?
Right. You ride the tiger and you're afraid to get off because it'll eat you. And so what do we have? One of the minor stories of the week, Lindsey Graham going on Fox News twice saying that he's all in for Trump 2028. Forget about the constitutional amendment. Now, I think that's not likely to happen. I don't think that's probable, but I think you'd have to be ridiculously naive if you didn't think that the guy that tried to overturn, a previous election might in fact not want to facilitate a peaceful transfer of power. I know that sounds paranoid, but at this point, I think that if you're not a realist, then you're not. Well, I'm sorry, if you're not exercising that imagination, then you're not being realistic.
And one more question is why do you look, there's been a lot of weeks of dramatic things and unsettling things if you are a fan of the Constitution and a fan of stability. But it's clear you think this is a week that feels different. It doesn't just feel different, it is different. Why is this distinct from what we've seen since January?
Well, it's distinct because it is so naked. It is naked political revenge, but also it's a willingness to use government power as a just a naked cudgel. I mean, let's go back to the FCC chairman Brendan Carr, who FCC has statutory limits on its power. But what does he do with Jimmy Kimmel? He says, you know, you can do this the easy way or the hard way, and gets away with it, at least temporarily. We can come back to that. You have the president realizing, you know what? I can get away with anything. I will never be held accountable. I have complete control over Congress. The courts have not blocked me. I control I control the Department of Justice and the FBI. I'm going to do with it whatever I want. Now, whether there was some shift in his mentality, we don't know. Um, but he feels as if he realizes I have all of these buttons in front of me and I'm going to push them. Now, I will say this that with the Comey indictment. I think he's drastically weakened his case by the comments he's made publicly about this. Judges read the papers, they watch podcasts, they know what's going on. It sounds like, from every credible expert I've heard, it's a very, very weak case. I'm not sure that Donald Trump totally cares. I mean, he wants his opponents to be thrown in jail. But as Gary Kasparov has said, the authoritarian doesn't need to arrest you and put you in jail. He needs to make you afraid. He needs to ruin your life. And so Jim Comey is going to have to spend, I don't know, millions of dollars defending himself. He's going to have to go through being an indicted person and all of that. So in many ways, that is the revenge. And and Donald Trump also knows that he can do that to Letitia James, he can do that to James Brennan, he can do that to somebody like a Miles Taylor. Um, he not only ruins their lives, but he makes everybody else have that thought in the back of their mind, you know, maybe I'm next, maybe I should be fearful, maybe I should shut up, maybe I should stand down.
And that seems like part of the reason that you'd go after someone like Jimmy Kimmel. He is famous and well known, but it kind of suggests that his range is it's a broad scope that he is using to figure out who to go after next. And so you really can't be confident, oh, I'm small potatoes. Why would he care about me? He keeps sending the message he remembers. I mean, it's a really kind of a vindictive president. It's a retribution agenda, essentially, instead of a normal policy agenda.
Well, you also touch on something else. It's not only a vindictive presidency, but you can never underestimate his pettiness, what he's going to do. I'm glad you mentioned Jimmy Kimmel because in a pretty awful week,
Yeah.
I think that was a high point, you know, and you and I talked about this earlier this week. But the way that Jimmy Kimmel came back, the way he's handling it, it feels like a win because I think it is a win. Disney eventually did come around to do the right thing, whether through pressure or principle, maybe a little bit of a mixture. Um, but Jimmy Kimmel is bigger than ever. So the whole point of Donald Trump was to cancel Jimmy Kimmel. You know, and he was thinking, I have the wind at my back. I got Colbert. I'm going to get Kimmel. I'm going to get Fallon. Then I'm going to get Seth Meyers. And what happens? It blows up in his face. Kimmel is bigger than ever. His ratings are bigger than ever. And he's got an audience to talk about a fundamental American value, you know, the bedrock American value of free speech. And I think that free speech is in our American DNA. And hypocritically, Trump and J.D. Vance and others had hijacked it temporarily. They borrowed it to get through the election. But now you're seeing this naked fist aimed at a comedian. And I think people do get that in a different way. And again, I'm not into the hopium, but this did feel like a positive inflection point, if for no other reason than it gives hope to people that some things do matter, that you can actually take action that will have a positive effect, that Trump's juggernaut is not completely irresistible.
You know, it's interesting. I've been looking for something else at the Federalist Papers and the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence. And the founders, if you're an originalist and read it, had such a kind of pessimistic view of human nature at some level. It was this entire political system made to check this, do whatever you can, because they understood. Obviously, it was a rebellion against a king. How easily this can happen, and watching this unfold in real time, and then looking at those old documents is quite powerful because you see what they were onto and what they were afraid of, and we haven't quite had to deal with it at this level yet.
I've been doing something like pretty much along those same lines. And it's interesting that you use the word originalist because, of course, that's, the big,
Right.
conservatives are constitutional originalists.
Right.
Well, I'm pretty confident about something that the original intent of the Constitution was not to have a emperor king like Donald Trump is trying to be. The point of that Constitution was not to have an all powerful president or federal government that would run roughshod over individual rights, private property rights, and states' rights. So again, this would be an interesting debate to have with people who say, yes, we should have an originalist approach to the Constitution because the original Constitution was how to create a government that gets rid of kings.
Right. So if the Supreme Court is going to draw on originalism to
Yeah,
justify executive power, they are not being originalists in any sense of the word. It is
in the most
antithetical
fundamental way. Yeah.
antithetical to the founding. What I mean, the other hard part, and certainly Democrats will have to think about this, and some Republicans might think about it, but how do you talk about these issues in a way that resonates with voters? I thought that Jimmy Kimmel actually did a very good job. He was very straightforward, got right to the point, even diminished his own show, but said the point is you have to be able to have a show like this.
Yeah.
How do you think the best way is for opponents of the president, or those who are worried about this, to communicate with average voters and not, it's hard not to sound alarmist when alarming things are happening. So how do you do it? What do you think?
Well, I think that Jimmy Kimmel gave, gave us a little bit of a template, which is that you directly, honestly, clearly describe what is going on. He didn't use euphemisms. He went right at it. And I think his directness is kind of refreshing that you can stand up and that you can win. See, I think that, part of the dynamic of the last 8 months is people deciding that they are going to keep their heads down because they don't think they can win. That's what the law firms thought, a lot of the universities, some of the big media companies. And so that creates this rolling sense of futility, right? If you're afraid all the time. A guy like Jimmy Kimmel says, look, I've risen from the dead. On the third day, I'm back. I am here. And I am not cowed. I'm gracious, but I'm not going to grovel. And so it's sort of a model. Plain speaking, direct speaking is effective. Ridicule is something that is obviously very effective. And it's obviously very much a vulnerability for somebody as thin-skinned as Donald Trump.
Except South Park gets away with it, which is interesting. I mean, I'm trying to figure out how they can be so direct, and here's a show that doesn't fit what we're seeing in a lot of the media right now, and they seem
Yeah,
to double down every week.
and it's
So I
working
don't.
for them.
Yeah. I don't know what the insulation is, and I know it's not about South Park. I mean, you have to look at a certain point. Why are there certain pockets that can
Yeah.
resist this or that have the impetus to resist it? And I don't have an answer to that. But I am curious of what that space is because I think it's going to be important going forward.
Well, I think part of maybe the pocket is the majority of the American people. Sometimes we forget with the MAGA dominance that they represent a minority of a minority, and so if if you are looking for an audience, if you're looking for a pocket, we are not alone, and we're not small in numbers who are pushing back against this. So I think part of it is, is to create that collective action. Now, I do understand. And I don't want to minimize the danger. I mean, Donald Trump right now, you ask what's different. Donald Trump right now realizes or feels that he has absolute control over all of the levers of government. The executive branch, Congress is not going to buck in. He is destroying the independence of, of, of institutions like the Department of Justice, but also the independence of the independent agencies, whether it's the FTC or the FCC or the SEC, or whether it's the Federal Reserve. And so he feels this is the moment where he can do anything. Now, that's a dangerous moment. It's a scary moment. It's also the kind of moment that history remembers as overreach and hubris. So we're in this, pivot point. And again, things are happening so fast, it's kind of hard to know to sort out the what's horrible from what's hopeful.
Where are the I was thinking, and were part of this back in the day, but
Mhm.
never Trumpers as a group. In the first term, they became quite the presence. They had, and I mean, different factions, but there was the ads, and they had the Lincoln Project kind of stuff. Where is that contingent? I was just thinking, I haven't heard kind of as a collective, as a political force. Did they? Are a lot of them scared? Have they just abandoned it altogether? Do you have any sense of where that went?
Well, yeah, and I don't have a short answer. I mean, there's, first of all, the Never Trump movement started as an effort to get the Republican Party to back away from the edge and stay a sane party. They failed completely. Let's be honest about this. This is a complete failure. There are no never Trumpers in the Republican Party. Now, before people blow back, I mean, an elected Republican, there's no Mitt Romneys anymore. There's no Jeff Flakes, the Adam Kinzingers, the Liz Cheneys are all gone. So, as a presence within the Republican Party, they do not exist. Um, Many never Trumpers have basically become, decided because we have to align with Democrats, we now become indistinguishable from other Democrats. So in some ways,
Mm.
they just sort of blended in so there's not a distinctive voice out there that you can identify. They're still there, but they're clearly an eclipse. Look, I mean, the moment Donald Trump was elected, we never Trumpers, the excommunication began, the exile began. I certainly realized that I was headed off to a desert island of exile. I never imagined that it would be quite as small an island as it turned out to be. But they're still out there. But again, in terms of any hope, for years people would say, well, is there some hope that the Republican Party will eventually come to its senses? Will the Republican Party stand up and push back? And I think the answer has been pretty eloquent and decisive that no, that is just not going to happen.
The irony is, I mean, if you think about it, uh, there would never be a better time for conservatives to make the kind of arguments Reagan was making. I mean, if you are an opponent of government and warn about how it can be misused, never has there been a period where you can point to how that can happen very easily and quickly. So there's actually a lot of space for kind of an old fashioned conservatism at this point, but there's no political space for it. But ideologically, it's kind of interesting to think of that Reagan generation watching this, and yet that argument is really not part of the political debate anymore.
Well, it really ought to be. I agree with you very much on this. That debate needs to be along the lines of now do you realize why we ought to limit the powers of government? Now do you realize why we should not invest this much power in the executive? Now do you understand the idea that if you create a government that can do all these wonderful things, you've created a government big and powerful enough to do all kinds of terrible things. So I think that there's a moment at which you go back to some fundamental principles, free speech being one of them. Now I think Jimmy Kimmel is actually helping to go back to those basic principles. Or why do we tolerate the ideas of people that we don't like or that we disagree with? This is also a moment to talk about why, people who talked about small government were not just narrow minded, eye shade conservative. They were genuinely concerned that a Leviathan government would squeeze the civic space and limit the freedom of individuals. So I do think that kind of conservatism, yeah, is possible, can get some traction. Whether that kind of conservatism gets much traction in Republican politics, I don't know,
Mm.
because that libertarian strain seems to have been edged out by the more nationalist culture war dominant aspects of MAGA.
I have one last question before I do. Thank you, everyone, for listening live. Thank you, everyone who listens afterwards. Please, we hope you can consider subscribing to our Substacks. These paid subscriptions are what allow us to have these conversations, set up the interviews, do all the work that's necessary to put all of this together. That's the nature of independent journalism. It's independent, but we depend on all of you. So thank you, and thanks for considering it. The last question, and I assume you have the same answer. What's this meeting that Secretary Hegseth is having on Tuesday? Do you have any sense of what's going on and what this is about?
No, and nobody else does as well. You're talking about where he has summoned all like 800 admirals and generals to leave their posts to come to a meeting in Virginia, and nobody knows what he's going to say. Now, as I wrote in my newsletter, I'm not going to speculate, but there are other people who are speculating. And my fear is that it's going to be something along the lines of, hey, we're about to go into some difficult times. I want who in this room is willing to commit right now and raise your hands that you will obey any order from Donald Trump. Now, the important thing to remember is that our military takes an oath to the Constitution, not to a person, not to the president. So the fear is that this is going to be some kind of a loyalty test, that if you raise your hands, you get to keep your job. If you don't raise your hands, you're going to be fired. Now, I would normally think that's pretty dark. But General Michael Hayden, retired four-star general, former director of Central Intelligence, last night on Thread said, yeah, that's what I'm afraid of. I'm afraid it's going to be a loyalty test for these generals. And so we will see. And if that is the case, that will be another one of these dramatic red lines. We've seen the destruction of the independence of all of these other entities, but the military has this long and rich and immensely important tradition of being non-political and non-partisan. And Pete Hegseth may put that at risk or drop a bomb on it next week. I don't know. Or maybe he's just gonna, get up on stage and show off how many push-ups he can do. I mean, who knows?
Right. Somehow I suspect that's not the agenda, but who knows at this point. But look, we are talking about a fragile, fraught, and dangerous moment for this constitutional system we've had for such a long, long time. And each week we speak and each story we talk about, those threats become more real. And what is imagined often happens. And we have to remember that when we hear the next story. So, Charlie Sykes, to the contrary, always enjoy our conversations. Thanks for doing it. We'll talk soon.
Thank you very much. Talk soon.
Bye.